Good morning, everyone. Today is the second session on Indes 116, that is leases. So in the previous session, we had discussed essentially what is a lease. Lease is a right to use an identified asset for a particular period of time, in exchange of which there is a consideration that flows from the lessee to the lessor. So this is what is a lease. So we discussed what exactly we mean by an identified asset. An identified asset essentially means the lessor does not have substantive rights of substitution. A lessor is deemed to have substantive rights of substitution if he can practically substitute the asset and he's economically benefited from that substitution. So we saw the case of TCS taking a vehicle from Blue Smart, and on any given day that vehicle can be exchanged if a better offer comes in the way of Blue Smart. However, we also saw that TCS takes a vehicle specifically for ferrying its CEO from his residence to his office and to be there at the CEO's office for the entire day from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. The same registration number, the same vehicle. So in that case, there is no substantive rights of there is no substantive substitution rights, and therefore at that point of time we would go ahead and record it as a lease arrangement. As a practical expedient, Ind AS 116 tells that you assume that the lessor does not have any substantive substitution right. Because if you assume the counter, then there would not be an identified asset, in which case there would not be a lease contract in the first place. So ye ho gaya mera identified asset. We also saw an example where certain procurement contracts may look just like procurement contracts, but in fact they contain a hidden element of lease. So the standard gives the guidance that at the inception you will have to evaluate whether the contract is a lease or whether it contains a lease So this was what we had discussed at length in the previous class. Then we had moved on to discussing separation of lease components. So it is quite possible that you may get a component, you may get a lease contract. For example, a furnished flat. Now, a furnished flat will contain two assets. One is the furniture fixtures which are there, and the other one is your space that you have obtained. Contrasting it with an unfurnished flat, clearly the furnished flat will be priced higher because you are getting the furniture, etc. So now the question is, should I separate the furnished component between the furniture fixtures as well as the space? The standard gives guidance by saying that if the customer benefits from usage of both the components and the components are not highly interdependent, then at that point of time you will have to perform the separation. There is no practical expedient to this. You cannot avoid this separation. How will you do the separation? How will you do the segregation? Well, you will do the segregation based on the standalone prices of the individual lease components. If the standalone components prices are not available, you will do a fair valuation in line with Ind AS 113, which requires maximization of observable inputs, minimization of unobservable inputs. And even if this is not possible, then finally you will move on to a residual value, which we will be discussing today. So this was what we had discussed in the previous session. We saw an example where separation was done. It may be possible that another component, a non-lease component, also could be a part of the lease arrangement. For example, maintenance. So suppose a company takes a residential flat on rent and its directors stay there, and the directors are getting access to the clubhouse, to the walking park, or the indoor park, swimming pool, etc. Then if that is the case, the directors are benefited, the company is benefited. So you will have to apportion the total contract value to the maintenance also, again in line with the standalone prices. However, here there is a practical expedient which is permitted, which tells that you can elect not to allocate anything to the non-lease component, in which case the entire amount would be allocated only to the lease components, and then you would proceed with accounting as the lease. If that is the case, what would happen? My non-lease component would not have any value. the lease components would have a slightly higher value, but ultimately your uh, lease components will ultimately flow in the profit and loss, so it won't make much of a difference. Okay, so is it clear till now what all we had discussed? Just a brief recap. Today what I will do is, first I will take you through a very small example, very small chota sa example, so that you are familiar with, you will just understand how exactly lease happens, how exactly lease is accounted for, and then we shall proceed with the discussion. My first example is not going to be lease accounting in detail. I think probably we will actually come to the accounting aspect in the last class, because today we will be spending a lot of time discussing on terms such as lease. What do you mean by lease payments? What do you mean by the lease term? These are the two major chunks of topics which we are going to be discussing today. Okay, so in a small nutshell, I will give a very small example for us to understand how the accounting will happen in the case of Ind AS 116. So let us come to a case where an office is taken on lease at rupees 1 lakh per annum. At rupees 1 lakh per annum. So the fundamental reason behind this Ind AS 116, or the fundamental presumption that is there, is that this lease contract is taken because the entity could not afford to buy the property. The entity could not afford to buy the property. And that is why the fundamental presumption is that this is more of a financing arrangement rather than a rental arrangement. Okay. So therefore, the lease term, this contract, I'm keeping a very small tenure. The lease term is 3 years. Okay. And the discounting factor is 10%. The discounting factor is 10%. What is this discounting factor? This is essentially the incremental rate of borrowing in the case of lessee. Lessee is the one who takes the asset and uses it. So the lessee, it is presumed that he does not have money to buy the asset, so he's taking it on lease. So this is kind of an off-balance sheet financing. This is something like an off-balance sheet financing. And therefore, Ind AS 116 tells we will do the accounting like that. So therefore, we are having year 1, 2, 3. Discounting factor at the rate of 10% will be 0.9091. Then I suppose it is going to be how much? 1 second. 0.8264, and last one will be, I think, 0.7513. 0.7513. So the lease payments or lease rent or cash outflow is going to be 1 lakh, 1 lakh, 1 lakh. Okay. So now if I calculate the present value of cash outflows, since it is the same, I will just take it as the annuity factor. I will just take it as the annuity factor. Just give me a minute. 98 plus 0.8264.7513, 2.4868. So my present value of lease payments is going to be 1 lakh into 2.4868. So this is equal to how much? 2 lakh 48,680. This is equal to 2,48,680. So on the inception, on the date of commencement of lease, the entry that will be passed is, this is my lease liability. So credit the lease liability with 2,48,680. And what are you going to debit? Well, you are going to debit something known as ROU asset. That is the office space. 2,48,680. 2,48,680. And this ROU asset which you have recognized will appear in your balance sheet as a separate line item. This will appear in your balance sheet as a separate line item. Moving forward, what will be the accounting that is going to happen? This is the accounting on the date of commencement. We'll look at this term today, date of commencement of lease. That is the first day of the year. The lease payment happens at the end of year one. The first day of the year, you are going to pass this entry. Okay. ROU asset account debit to lease liability. Okay. Now this ROU asset, you will have to depreciate. This ROU asset, you will have to depreciate. Okay. Now, 2,48,680. The life of the lease contract is 3 years. So 2,48,680 divided by 3. This is going to be 82,893 per annum. Per annum. Okay. So you will be taking it as 82,893 per annum depreciated. So over a 3-year period, my ROU asset is going to be entirely depreciated. Sir, what about the lease liability? Well, you will prepare something similar to an amortization table that you used to prepare for a financial liability. So year 1, 2, 3. Opening liability was 2,48,680. Finance cost at the rate of 10%. So this comes to 24,868. Payment is going to be how much? Sir, I'm paying off 1 lakh, right? Yes, I'm paying off 1 lakh. So closing balance is going to be how much? 248,680 plus 24,868 minus 1 lakh. Okay. So 1,73,548. This will be the opening balance for the second year. Finance cost 17,355. Again, you are going to make a payment of 1 lakh. So plus 17,355 minus 1 lakh. So 90,903. 90,903. Okay. So 1 second. I will pay 1 lakh. So the balancing figure will be your finance cost. वो rounding off के वजह से it's not coming accurately. Otherwise, it should be accurate. Okay. So this comes to 0. So where will the finance cost go? This will go in my P&L. This is also depreciation which goes in my P&L. Is it okay? So this is how the accounting is exactly going to happen in the case of a lease contract. Have you understood the example in brief? Have you understood? I know it's not a big example. It's a very simple example. But did you guys understand how the lease contract is being done? Yes? Did you understand? Yeah, is it clear? Okay. Sanjay Kejriwal, I will be discussing your case in the next class. Okay, the exemptions will be covered in the 3rd class once we are done with the accounting. Okay. So today I will not be discussing that. Okay. So that is why now coming to this case, once you have understood this, you are now going to be able to understand why we are taking this discount rate. Okay. You should now be in a position to understand and appreciate this. Okay. This discount rate and arrangement was done because the ROU asset is ultimately flowing from my lease liability, and lease liability is taken as present value of future lease payments. And that is why we are using a discounting factor. In this case, we are using a discount rate and discounting it to the present value. Are you able to kind of recollect? This was a query that was asked in the last class. So I thought before we proceed with anything, you should at least have a small idea of how the leases are getting accounted for. Okay. All right, so now let us proceed with our discussion on separation of lease components. Separation of lease components. Okay, so today what I will do is I will be taking you through the topics that I want to cover up today. Shortage of time, we do not have adequate time today as well as in the next class. By the next class, we'll have to wind up this session, and therefore, I will not be discussing ICAI illustrations in detail. Okay. Two reasons. One is I have already discussed in the previous sessions. So you can refer that. You can refer that. And the second reason is it's purely theory. It's purely theory. So what I'm going to discuss in the class today, you just have to take and apply that in the illustrations. Up to illustration number 26 in the study module, you should not be having any problem. So today's class will be purely theory. We will refer our presentation wherever there is a requirement. Okay. And then I will take you through that so that on your own, you should be in a position to read and understand and appreciate the standard, because I feel that understanding the concept today is more important. You will then be in a position to answer the illustrations yourselves. Okay, those illustrations are merely practical cases which I am going to discuss. So you will be in a better position to understand and solve that by yourselves. Is it okay? Yes. So now let us come to the lease contract, separations of components. Okay, so lease components. Okay, we have flat, furniture, maintenance. So this is a lease component. This is a lease component. This is a non-lease component. Now, the standalone prices are 6 lakhs, 2 lakhs, and 75,000. So the total standalone price is 8,75,000. Now you are getting all of this bundled up for 7 lakhs. मतलब आपको combo offer मिल रहा है. You are getting a combo offer. So what the standard tells, you will have to split it based on standalone prices. You will have to split it based on standalone prices. ठीक है, मैंने split कर दिया 7 lakhs divided by 8,75,000 into 6 lakhs. So this comes to 4,80,000. This comes to, I think, 1,60,000. And the last component will be 60,000. Okay, so how will this accounting happen? How will this accounting happen? Assuming that this contract is for 3 years. This contract is for 3 years. 7 lakhs per annum is the lease rent. I will be having an ROU asset lease liability for the flat. As 4,80,000 multiplied by the annuity factor, assuming that it is paid once a year at the end of the year. Annuity factor, whatever be the discount rate, 10%, whatever it is, for 3 years. So this is going to be my ROU asset lease liability in respect of the flat. Moving on to ROU asset lease liability of the furniture. This will again be a second lease liability, 1,60,000 into annuity factor, whatever, 10% for example. So this is going to be my second ROU asset and lease liability. And coming to maintenance. Maintenance is 60,000 per annum. 60,000 per annum. Will it be a lease component or a non-lease component? Sir, for a lease component, we need to have an identified asset in the first place. In this case, is there an identified asset? No, you do not control the clubhouse. You do not control the walking track. You do not control the society. आपका कोई control है ही नहीं वहां पे. So it is not an identified asset. Still, you are standing to benefit from it. Still आपको फायदा हो रहा है उससे. So what the standard tells, in that case you allocate it. This is a non-lease component. This 60,000 per annum will go straight away to the profit and loss account. This will go straight away to the P&L as a non-lease component, usually on a time basis. Okay, usually on a time basis. Is it okay? Yes, it is a non-lease component. So that goes to the P&L. That goes to the P&L. Excellent. The standard, however, gives a practical expedient in this case. Practical expedient means standard बोलता है convenience के लिए ले सकते हो. Okay. So convenience के लिए what it tells, do not take anything as the maintenance, do not allocate anything to the maintenance contract. You just take everything to the lease components only. In which case, this is the alternative I am discussing. Okay, this is the alternative. So I will divide 7 lakhs in the ratio of 6:2. I will divide 7 lakhs in the ratio of 6:2. Okay, so 7 lakhs divided by 8 into 6. So this will be 5,25,000 and the other one is going to be 1,75,000. This is going to be 0. This is going to be 0. Now the question is, how am I going to account? So instead of 4,80,000, this will be 5,25,000. Instead of 1,60,000, this will be 1,75,000. And instead of 60,000, this is going to be 0. This is going to be 0. But sir, where is my true and fair view? आप इतना बड़ा बड़ा बात करते थे, true and fair, true and fair. यहाँ पे possible है, फिर भी आप नहीं कर रहे हो. It's not needed because the final impact is not going to be a majorly material one. See, 4,80,000 would go in the P&L as 2 parts. One is a portion of 4,80,000 would go as depreciation of ROU asset. The other portion of 4,80,000 would go as finance cost while amortizing your lease liability. The same story would happen with 1,60,000, where part of it would go as depreciation every year. Part of it would be added as finance cost every year. So therefore, ultimately, 4,80,000, 1,60,000 would flow into the profit and loss over the 3-year tenure of the contract. And 60,000 also would flow. Now, all I'm doing is, instead of this 60,000 flowing separately, I'm clubbing it with both the lease components and flowing and making it flow into the profit and loss account. By ultimately 3 साल में खर्चा दिखना चाहिए ना profit and loss में. That is what I am doing it exactly. I am not avoiding any true and fair view. This is more of a matter of convenience. And that is why this practical expedient is made available to you. This practical expedient is made available to you. Have you understood the implications of the practical expedient? Yes. Practical expedient, when we introduce, did you understand uska effect kya hoga? Yes. Uska effect material hoga ya immaterial hoga? It will be immaterial. It will be immaterial. Okay. Just give me a thumbs up. Are you okay with the understanding? Okay. Are you okay with the understanding? Yes. Okay. Manini has confirmed. More confirmations. Soham, where is Balram is not there. Saksham is there. Confirm. Okay. Srishti, confirm. Okay. Yes. All right. Saksham has confirmed, Soham has confirmed, Srishti has confirmed. Okay, so this is how the treatment will happen. So now let us come to the allocation part. Let us come to the allocation part. Suppose, now I'll just wipe this off because I think by now you would be clear with the case. Now we come to how the allocation should happen. You remember we used to do this allocation in another standard? You remember we used to do this allocation in another standard? आपको याद है? Allocation based on standalone prices. We used to do it in one more standard. कौन सा standard? Can you please help me to remember? We used to do this allocation in another standard. Allocation in the ratio of standalone prices. We used to do it in the case of indices. Which indices? कौन सा standard? We used to do it in the case of indices 115, right, Rashmi Kamath? We used to do it in the ratio of indices 115. Indices 115, suppose you buy an AC and with that a 5-year warranty is included. So what the standard requires is you recognize the revenue as and when the performance obligation is fulfilled. Earlier, what used to happen was I would recognize the entire revenue on the transfer of air conditioner, and then I would make a provision for the warranty over the next 5 years. But 115 has changed that. 115 says you have two performance obligations. One is sale of AC, the other one is warranty services. So you will have to split your consideration between what is for the AC and what is for the warranty. How will you do the split? Depending on the standalone prices. So once you got the split, on the delivery of AC, recognize that much revenue. As far as the warranty is concerned, that revenue you will split it over a period of 5 years as and when the performance obligations are fulfilled. So this is the same concept like what we used to do in the case of Ind AS 115. Okay. So now, suppose, sir, the standalone price is not available, we will go to fair value. We will go to fair value, and fair value is what we have already studied in Ind AS 113. That is, maximize the use of observable inputs, minimize the use of unobservable inputs. So you can look at the prices in the surrounding areas, make certain adjustments, and then do the split in that particular ratio. Acha. Sir, standalone also is not there. Fair value also is not possible. In that case, how am I going to do the split? In that case, we will be following the residual value approach. Now forget maintenance for the time being. Okay. Forget maintenance. So the residual value approach goes something like this. See, suppose the lessee comes and tells you, I want to do the split, but there is no standalone price available for lease of flat and lease of furniture. For lease of flat and lease of furniture. Okay, then go for the fair value. That is also not available. Okay. What is available is that the flat is available for 6,50,000. Flat is available for 6,50,000. Flat which is leased out has a value of 6,50,000. Iska standalone price is available, but fair value is not possible. Neither is the for the furniture. Nothing is possible because nobody lets out furniture in our area, in our city. So it is not possible. Okay, it is not possible. Okay, so now what the standard tells, in that case, ज़्यादा दिमाग खराब मत करो. Take it as 6,50,000, and then a residual approach. You allocate 50,000 to furniture. You allocate 50,000 to furniture. This is the meaning of your residual approach. कुछ है नहीं तो क्या करना है? We will have to follow this method. We will have to follow this method. Okay. No other option is available. ये method follow करो. Take it as a balancing figure and proceed with the calculation. Can you go ahead and say that furniture's rent is 0? You cannot. You cannot. Okay. So वो गलती मत करना. अच्छा. Many times what will happen is the lessor will tell you the breakup. Like the lessor will tell you Flat is for 7 lakhs. I'm giving you furniture for free. So you will be tempted to say the lease component of the flat is 7 lakhs. The lease component of the furniture is 0. But it's not practical. Ignore the breakup that is there in the agreement. Ignore the breakup that is there in the agreement. Your allocation between lease components or between lease and non-lease components should purely and purely be on the basis of standalone prices. If standalone price not available, on the basis of fair value. If fair value not available, on the basis of residual value. Okay, that's it. Whatever is written in the agreement, whatever the lessor tells the lessee, all of that is going to be irrelevant. All of that is going to be irrelevant. So are we clear with separation of lease components? Are we clear with separation of lease components and separation of lease and non-lease components so far? Yes. Sir, instead of 6,50,000, if it is 7,10,000. I knew it. Last batch में भी किसी ने ये सवाल किया था. $7,10,000. This is what is Srishti's question. Okay. How do we do the allocation? You tell me, Srishti, no? Yeah. आप बताओ मुझे. What are you? You are a lessor. आपको मालूम है फ्लैट का वैल्यू 7,10,000 है बाहर. You know that flat's value is 7,10,000. I assume that the lessor is prudent, the lessor is having business sense, the lessor is rational in his thinking. Why on earth will he sell flat plus the furniture? Why on earth will he lease out the flat and furniture for a value less than the lease value of the flat only? क्यों करेगा वो ऐसा? भाई वो नहीं कर सकता. He cannot do that. Okay. If he does that, it means he's not of a sound mind. Okay, so this case will never happen practically. This case will never happen practically. Okay, so iske liye please don't go into this thought process. Okay, it won't happen at all. Okay, so that is how the case is. Now let us move on to another lease and non-lease component. Okay, lease and non-lease component. Okay, so suppose I have flat, furniture and not maintenance and all. मेरा society इतना posh नहीं है. It does not have clubhouse वगैरह वगैरह. All those things are amenities are not there. But instead, what the lessor is doing is the lessor charges you for insurance. The lessor charges you for insurance. What the lessor has done is the lessor has taken insurance for his property and he's charging that insurance to you. He's charging that insurance to you. Why he charges it off to you? Well, he tells you are there in that flat. You are using appliances like LPG, etc., etc. So I have to protect my flat against you. And because I have to protect my flat, I'm getting it insured. Okay. So this becomes a lease component. This becomes a lease component. This becomes a non-lease component. Same breakup I take 7 lakhs. This is going to be 6 lakhs, 2 lakhs. For simplicity's sake, I'll keep this also 75,000. Okay, itna rehta nahi hai, but I'm just keeping it for simplicity's sake. 8,75,000. Now think and answer. Maintenance cost mein you understood one thing. What used to happen in maintenance cost? Well, in maintenance cost, the benefits of maintenance would come to the lessee. That means the lessee would enjoy the clubhouse. The lessee would enjoy the what you can say, the swimming pool. The lessee would enjoy the walking park. Everything the lessee would enjoy. In this case, in the case of insurance, is the lessee going to be benefited or not? Is the lessee going to be benefited or not? What do you think? What do you think? Is the lessee going to benefit with this insurance that is being put on him or not? Srishti is saying lessee will not benefit. What about the others? No. Manini is also saying no, which is right. Dekho, kal ko you have your LPG. Heaven forbid, some unfortunate event happened. The LPG burst. Flat ka thoda sa hissa jal gaya. So therefore, the insurance company will compensate. Whom will it compensate? Will it compensate the lessee who is a tenant, or will it compensate the lessor who is the owner? Sir, it will compensate the owner. It will not compensate the tenant, because tenant is not the owner. So therefore, the ultimate beneficiary of this insurance is not the lessee, it is the lessor. वो एक बहाना था to allocate the cost to the insurance, but you are not going to benefit. The lessee is not going to benefit. It's only the lessor who is going to benefit. And therefore, when we have such components, such non-lease components where the lessee does not benefit, do not allocate anything to the non-lease component. Do not allocate anything to the non-lease component. You will take entirely everything towards flat and furniture. Obviously, no. See, if I have to put an expense in the profit and loss in respect of a non-lease component, I can put the expense if I get any benefit out of that expense. यहाँ पे तो कुछ benefit है ही नहीं. Here it is not a benefit, and therefore I cannot allocate anything to that. I will allocate everything to flat or furniture. It may be possible I may have flat, furniture, maintenance, and insurance. In which case, to maintenance I will allocate, to insurance I will not allocate. Is it okay? Yes. Is it okay? All right. Manini has confirmed. Suppose instead of insurance, we write it as contribution towards property tax. Contribution towards property tax. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Property tax. Will you do the allocation or will you not do the allocation? Property tax means the house tax लगता है by the municipality. Will you allocate the lease to the property tax component or will you not allocate? No allocation. Clearly there won't be an allocation because the lessee is not going to benefit out of that allocation. Hare, you pay the property tax, aapko kya fayda mil raha hai? You are not getting any benefit. See, it is the lessor's duty to pay the property tax. It is the lessor's duty to pay the property tax. Property tax आप भरोगे, municipality वाला आएगा, आपका थोड़ा बहुत काम करेगा, and then he is going to go back. Okay, that is the reason you pay the property taxes. आपके street के सामने light लगाएगा. All these kind of jobs are being done because you are going to pay the house tax. But what benefit the lessee gets out of it? Lessee gets no benefit out of it. Kal ko lessee moves out and goes, the benefit of that property tax is going to be there with the lessor and not with the lessee. And therefore, we will not allocate anything to a non-lease component out of which no benefit arises to the lessee. We will allocate something to the non-lease component only if that non-lease component is giving rise to a benefit to the lessee. However, there is a practical expedient whereby you can elect not to allocate anything to a non-lease component even though it is benefiting the lessee, and you can allocate the entire consideration to the lease components. There is no practical expedient available for saying that I will not allocate anything to the lease components also. Lease components, you have to do the separation. For the separation of the lease components, the condition is they should not be highly interdependent. If they are highly interdependent, treat them as one and do the allocation and do the accounting. If they are not highly interdependent and you are benefiting from both of them, then it is mandatory for you to do the allocation. Are you clear now? Have we understood everything about separation of lease components? Yes. सब कुछ समझ में आ गया अपने को? Clear? Yes. Manini has confirmed. Srishti has confirmed. Saksham, your confirmation. Shailendra, your confirmation. Okay. Rakesh had asked, Soham is there? Yes, Soham, your confirmation. Okay. Rakesh had asked a question, what do you mean by observable inputs? Well, you will have to go through Indes 113, Rakesh. Okay. Sorry, Rahul. Okay, Rahul, you will have to go through Indes 113, where we had discussed observable inputs and unobservable inputs in detail. Okay. So please go through that and then you will be in a position to understand. Observable inputs means what is readily observable from the market. That's it. Okay. All right, great. So we have completed that. We will just take a quick look at the notes on this. So you should be knowing that sir ने जो पढ़ाया वही लिखा है notes में. Okay. It is possible that the lease contract may have multiple lease components. Okay. Like lease of a furnished flat would contain property as well as the furniture fixtures. It is important to separate the lease components. So separately identified assets such as furniture fixtures, building, retail space, air conditioning. Okay. Separation is to be done if the following conditions are satisfied. The lessee can benefit from use of each asset or component, and the underlying asset is not highly interrelated or highly dependent. I told you this, the same thing is written. Separation of lease components fulfilling the above conditions is mandatory. करना ही पड़ेगा अपने को. There is no choice. That is, there is no practical expedient for the non-separation. Separation would be based on the ratio of standalone price. We saw that. Therefore, any breakup or any values assigned in the lease contract would be ignored. Academic purposes only. If standalone prices or fair values are not given, assume the given breakup to be as per standalone prices only. ये खाली exam purposes के लिए, academic purposes के लिए. Okay. Where the standalone price is not available, you can determine the fair value by maximizing the use of observable inputs. I explained this also to you. Lastly, if the fair value of some components cannot be computed, the same is taken as a balancing figure. हमने कहा residual value, इधर आ गया आपका residual value. Is it okay? Yes. Any doubts? जो मैंने पढ़ाया वो सब कुछ है इधर, कुछ नया नहीं है, कुछ हमने नहीं पढ़ाया ऐसा कुछ नहीं है, सब कुछ है यहाँ पर. Okay. So I'm leaving these illustrations for homework. See, they are very simple. Okay, they are very simple. I hope you will be able to try it out. Okay. नहीं होगा तो please refer the previous batches lectures. Okay, refer the previous batch. I had only taken same presentation, same person, same voice, same discussion. खाली थोड़ा बहुत the examples may differ here and there. Okay, but it's the same person who is talking, so you will be able to understand it. Okay, all right. Separation of, okay. Separation of lease and non-lease components. We had discussed this. So it is possible that a single lease contract may have lease and non-lease components. For example, lease of flat with maintenance facilities or water and electricity charges, or lease of car with chauffeur services. That means with a driver. Okay. Such agreements are in substance lease contract plus purchase of goods or services, obviously. Separation needs to be done between the lease and non-lease components. After separation, the lease component will be accounted as per Ind AS 116, I told you, and the non-lease component will be accounted for based on the respective Ind AS. If no Ind AS is applicable, then in accordance with GAAP, which generally involves expensing to the P&L. Discussed. Optional exemption, you can use a practical expedient. Where such an exemption is availed, entire contract consideration would be allocated to the lease components. That is, the lease components would strictly speaking be overstated. The lease components would strictly speaking be overstated, but uska koi tension nahi hai. Ultimately, we are what you can say, that overstated amount will ultimately flow to the profit and loss over the lease tenure. So you don't have to worry about the overstatement. Important aspect. Only those lease components which provide benefit to the lessee are to be considered for the above purposes discussed with you. Components such as property taxes, insurance, admin charges, etc. are included in the lease contract which do not provide any benefit. The contracted amount of such components would be included in the overall contract consideration, and allocation to the lease or lease and non-lease components, depending on the practical expedient, would be made based on the standalone prices or the fair value. So whatever is allocated to that component which is not benefiting the lessee, you will allocate that based on the standalone prices or fair value. Okay. All right. Now, ye ho gaya. So these questions I leave it for you. We have done quite a number of questions on this, so you should be fairly comfortable now. Okay, so Soham has a question, sir. If we decide to absorb the non-lease components into the lease components, do we have to follow this for all the lease contracts, or can it happen on only to the ones we choose? You can choose it contract by contract, Soham. You can choose it contract by contract. Like for example, you had studied revaluation. I know why this question came. Revaluation may you had in India 16, you cannot do cherry picking. Once you revalue one asset in a particular class, all the assets of that class should be revalued. So here there is no such requirement. You can do it on a contract by contract basis. Okay, so that takes care of separation of lease components, separation of lease and non-lease components. Okay, coming back, we are now inching slowly towards accounting. Okay, there are 2 to 3 things in accounting which we are very concerned with. Once we do that, the next class accounting is going to be fairly uncomplicated. Except for lease modification and reassessment, the chapter is very simple. Okay, doesn't matter about consistency. If you look at the conceptual framework, I don't think consistency is mentioned as a principle. Okay, consistency ka koi principle nahi hai. The principle is faithful representation. So aap faithful representation follow kar lo, that is more than enough. If you look at indices, at every point of time, indices is doing 2 things which are quite different compared to what we have trained, what we have been trained since the very beginning. First one is we have been trained about consistency. Indices says consistency is not so important as is faithful representation. Faithful representation is right up on top. Consistency is there down. So you can go ahead and ignore consistency to ensure faithful representation. The second and the more important thing that Ind AS does is Ind AS has not even mentioned prudence or conservatism in its principles. Ind AS goes for a more realistic accounting. We have seen this application in multiple places. I will tell you where you have seen it. You have seen in fair valuation, we go for, if the principal market is not available, we go for the most advantageous market. What is the most advantageous market? It is the market which maximizes the net proceeds. Why do we choose most advantageous market? If it was conservatism, I would have gone for the least advantageous market. but I'm going for most advantageous market because you are a business entity. You will obviously sell your goods in that market which maximizes the net proceeds for you. And therefore, the standard says fair value will be with reference to the most advantageous market in case there is no principal market. So this is one place where you are going to have your prudence cross-questioned. The other place where your prudence is cross-questioned is Ind AS 115, when you are having revenue that has to be recognized based on fulfillment of certain conditions. Based on fulfillment of certain conditions, the lease incentive that you're going to get. So suppose you have a contract to construct a dam, and that dam, if you construct within 5 years, you are going to get an incentive from the contractee of say 10 lakh rupees. If it was AS9 or any other AS under the AS regime, then you would not record this 10 lakhs because you would say that this is not to be recorded based on prudence principle. I will postpone it. If at the end of the 5th year, I am going to complete it, then I will recognize it on receipt basis. But Ind AS 115 says, no, wait, stop. On the date of commencement of construction of the dam, if you feel, believe and understand that you complete this contract within 5 years, include that 10 lakhs also in the consideration and do the accounting. So this is a massive change in the way our accounting is going to happen, the way our accounting is happening now. It's not only prudence, it's realistic. Okay, so realistic means agar फायदे की बात है तो show that फायदा in your accounting. No, make sure the stakeholders know that you are giving a faithful representation to them. So it's more about realistic accounting as compared to prudence. Okay, so this is the change which we are having in the Ind AS regime. Okay, coming back to Ind AS 116, हम अभी अपने topic पे आते हैं. Right now, two things which we have to discuss. Small definitions, nothing great. Okay. Inception date and commencement date. Okay, so what do you mean by inception date? What do you mean by inception date? Inception date is earlier of date of lease agreement and date of commitment to the contract to the principal terms. So what is the principal terms in the contract? Your commitment to that is your earlier of the two dates. So inception date is the date when an entity assesses whether a contract contains a lease or not. Okay, is or contains a lease. For example, commitment to the terms happens on 1st April 2021. Date of lease agreement is 15th June 2021. Means your date of commitment to the terms is earlier of the two. So inception date will be 1st April 2021. Okay, ये तो inception हो गया. Inception date means the date when you assess whether it contains a lease or not. But अपने को inception date लेके क्या करना है? ठीक है, आपने decide कर लिया. अपने को चाहिए सर journal entry कौन से date पे पास करना वो बताओ. Sum total में all the stories and explanation and everything is very nice to hear, but बात आती है सर journal entry कौन से date पे पास किया जाए. For that we refer to the commencement date. It refers to the date when the underlying asset is made available for use to the lessee. The accounting of the ROU asset and lease liability will start from this date. Okay, so continuing the above example, date of making the asset available for use 1st July 2021. Commencement of lease payments will happen from 1st August. So commencement date is not 1st August, it is going to be 1st July. See, lease payment is just a discharge of lease liability. Look at the substance. You are getting the asset to be used with effect from 1st July. It happens many times. See, you take a huge factory space on rent. Now, when you take it on rent, The first 2 to 3 months will go in only setting up the factory, placing your machinery, getting the storerooms ready, getting the dispatch area ready, ensuring water supply is all there, ensuring you meet your safety requirements. और ये सब चीज होने के बाद you have to call the municipality, etc., the industrial development corporation officers to ensure safety requirements are met, carry out trial runs. All this is not going to happen in one day only. It will take 3 to 5 months. So in this 3 to 5 months, you will not be having any revenue. You will not be having any revenue. So the lessor also knows this fact. The lessor also knows this fact. So the lessors will always have a condition where we will give the lease, the asset to you on today's date, say 1st July. But you can start paying us the rent from 1st November onwards. So 1st July, the asset has come to you. You are having a right of control over that asset. See, lease is what? It is a right to use an identified asset. So 1st July को आपके पास वो identified asset आ गया, आपके पास उसको यूज करने का right आ गया. You can do whatever you want in those 4 months, and thereafter the payment is going to happen. That means the asset came to you on 1st July. So on 1st July itself, you will recognize the ROU asset and the lease liability. Sir, payment नहीं हुआ तो क्या बात है? Payment will happen later. And when the payment happens later, that time you can pass the entry for the payment. That time you will pass the entry for the payment. Sir, will the date of lease agreement and available for you be the same? Never, never. It is not going to be the same. Okay. Why? Because it's rarely possible. See, that's what I'm saying. Okay. A date of lease agreement and available for you is not necessary. Okay. It is possible that you enter into an agreement on 15th of July. The asset will be available to you from 1st of August. हो सकता है ना? See, you have entered into an agreement. That means you are committing to the terms. So date of lease agreement typically will go as an inception date. Typically will go as an inception date. It is just signifying your consensus, signifying your commitment. That's it. Okay. But the actual liability, when it will come, see, on the inception date, you signed the lease agreement. Can the lessor demand the payment? लाओ मेरे को payment दे दो, आपने agreement sign कर दिया. अरे, if you have signed it, you will ask the lessor, sign तो किया बेटा, but asset किधर है? You give me the asset, let me start using it, then you take your payment. So it cannot be the same, it will be different. Okay, so that is one thing. But in rare cases, it can be the same by saying that today only you sign and take the property and go. Okay, so that case it will be the same. Sir, Manini is saying, sir, if we give a 3-month gap or a 2-month gap, it will be a loss for the lessor for those 2 months. Do you think lessor is so innocent? Okay, कि उसको पता नहीं होगा कि उसको 2 महीने का लॉस है. वो लॉस he will make it good by increasing his lease rents in the future. Yes or no? तो कोई लॉस या प्रॉफिट की बात नहीं होगी. It's all included in the contract values. Okay, it's all included in the contract values. Okay, तो ये हो गया मेरे दो छोटे छोटे टर्म, that is inception date and commencement date. Okay, and now we come to the first most important definition of today. The first most important option, the first most important definition of today. Two things will be very important. One is lease term, the other is lease payments. ये दो चीजें अपने को समझ में आ गए ना, then we are thorough with this standard. Okay, ये standard में in all 3 things are very important: lease term, lease payments, and lease liability. Everything is there in these 3 things. Okay, ROU asset ultimately flows from lease liability. Okay, there are some small adjustments to ROU asset, but that will be taken care of. But ये 3 चीजें अपने को perfect करनी है. Lease liability in particular, and for determining the lease liability, अपने को 2 चीजों की जरूरत है. One is the lease term, the other is the lease payments. So we now start with lease term. We now start with lease term. सर व्हाट इज लीज टर्म? अरे सर लीज टर्म क्या अग्रीमेंट में लिखा रहेगा 10 साल के लिए, 15 साल के लिए, 20 years. It would be written in the agreement, no? 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, 15 years. That is the lease term. Ha, it is quite simple if we think from that option, if we think from that perspective. So typically, those of you who think that it is that term, it is definitely that term. So it is the non-cancelable period specified in the agreement. मतलब ये तो होगा ही होगा, no doubt about it. This will definitely happen. Okay, but suppose your contract contains something like this. The non-cancelable period is 5 years. The non-cancelable period is 5 years. Plus, you have option to renew for another 5 years. Option to renew for another 5 years. Now the question is, अब बताओ बेटा क्या होगा तुम्हारा lease term? Will it be 5 years or will it be 10 years? Will it be 5 years or will it be 10 years? And now the standard proceeds to give guidelines for this. The standard proceeds to give guidelines for this. Okay. सबसे पहले we will discuss this thinking it as option from option available with lessee. Option available with lessee. Option available with lessee. Lessee is the one who has the right to use that asset. So we will now think from the perspective of the lessee. Okay. So the standard gives certain pointers. Okay. For us to determine whether it contains, whether we have to take this 5 years or not. So first one is, we will ask the lessee, likely to renew the option. Is the lessee likely to renew the option? Suppose he answers it as yes. Suppose he answers it as yes. In that case, what is going to be your lease term? Your lease term will be 5 plus 5 is equal to 10 years. 5 plus 5 is equal to 10 years. Very simple. Let us move on to the next one. What will be your indicators? Okay. वो answer नहीं देगा likely to renew the option. वो answer नहीं देगा, वो चुप बैठेगा. Then you look at certain indicators. Like what indicators? Improvements. Leasehold improvements suggest tenure will exceed 5 years. Consider a case where you have a 5-year lease arrangement, but that is your plant. That is your plant. तो आपने वहां पे areas change किए. You put a dispatch area. You ensured that the truck is placed in the dispatch area and you can easily put your goods into the truck. तो आपने उस हिसाब से डिजाइन किया. You have placed your machines in a particular manner to minimize the movement of raw material and WIP between them. All these structural alterations and modifications you would have made in your factory, and therefore the useful life of these improvements is far more than 5 years, and therefore it is an indication that you intend to continue in this property beyond 5 years. So here the lease term is going to again be 5 plus 5 is equal to 10 years. 5 plus 5 is equal to 10 years. Okay. Now we move on to the third case. इसका भी आंसर नहीं देगा वो. So then you will think, is it a critical asset? Is it a critical asset? Okay, what do you mean by critical asset? Suppose you take a company's R&D center. like you are a pharmaceutical company, you have to have a strong R&D center. This R&D center is on a property which is on lease for 5 years with a 5-year renewal option. Do you think R&D center can be ghadi changed? No. Forget R&D center. Suppose it is a corporate headquarters. Suppose it is a corporate headquarters. Corporate headquarters means it is a scenario where all your MCA details, filing, addresses, everything is given at this particular place. So it becomes a critical asset in that case. And therefore, in such cases also, it is going to be 5 plus 5 is equal to 10 years. 5 plus 5 is equal to 10 years. Fourth case, you have subleased it. Sublease for 9 years. 1 to 3 मैंने कुछ भी नहीं किया. I have not commented. But जैसे ही मुझे asset मिला, the moment I got the asset, I have subleased it for another 9 years. That means I have to honor that commitment. And if I have to honor that commitment of sublease for 9 years, I should have the property for more than 5 years. So here also, it is likely that the option will be exercised. So 5 plus 5 is equal to 10 years. 5 plus 5 is equal to 10 years. Is it okay? Yes. Fifth case. Lease rent post 5 years is very low compared to market value of rent at such time. Is it okay? Okay. So this lease rent is factored in your agreement, and it will say that for the renewal period, whatever be the market rent at that time, I will charge only 50% of the market rent, which is a significant reduction. So this is going to imply that you are benefited, you may take it. So 5 plus 5 is equal to 10 years. Okay. So the question that comes to Srishti's mind is, when are you going to ask this question? Will you ask it in the beginning? Will you ask it anytime during the lease tenure? Will you ask it in the 5th year? When are you going to ask? I will ask another question to you so that you can get an answer to this, and others also think. When do I record the lease asset? When do I record the ROU asset? Sir, ROU asset हम तब record करेंगे जब हमें lease liability record करनी है. Okay. And when do I record the lease liability? Well, that will be on the date the ROU asset and lease liability is available. Okay. So, वो तो available की बात हो गई. When I have to record the lease liability, what is the lease liability? Present value of cash outflows on account of lease. So when I talk about present value, I will have to consider the period of use. So you have to determine the period on which date, on the date when you record or on the date subsequently. Sir, ideally, it will be the commencement date. Ideally, it will be the commencement date. Yes, did you understand, Srishti? Ideally, it will be the commencement date. Okay. Is it clear? Yes. All clear? Srishti, did you follow? Yes. Acha. Now I will only contradict my statement and I will say that, देखो, मैंने lease तो ले लिया. I took the lease, but I'm not sure how the market will respond. So suppose I'm in the service industry, I open a restaurant with a 5-year lease, and there is a 5-year renewal option. बट मुझे नहीं पता 5 years के बाद क्या होगा. Particularly after COVID, I am a bit hesitant. Okay. So therefore, since I am a little bit hesitant, what will happen is I will tell my lessor that I will wait and watch. So if you are waiting and watching, then that means that you are still not sure whether you will take it for 10 years or will you take it for 5 years. Sir, suppose I assume 5 years right now. Okay, you assume 5 years right now. After 3 years, you are seeing that demand has really picked up. Your restaurant has become famous. People are flocking in. You really think that I should go ahead and uh, increase the lease tenure and exercise the option. Can you do that? Yes, you can do that. You can reassess the lease term in the middle or during the middle of the lease tenure itself. So you can say at the end of the 3rd year, yeah, my restaurant has picked up. I am confident of doing well. So I will exercise the option. So then what will happen is, commencement date, you would have recognized ROU asset, lease liability for how much? For 5 years. 3 साल बीत गए, 3 years passed. So at the end of the 3rd year or beginning of the 4th year, you are asked the question, what is your decision? Now you say, no, I will extend it for some more time. So beginning of 4th year, you will reassess the lease term. And what are you going to do? You will take it as another 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, another 7 years. That means 2 years original which is left plus 5 years. And this reassessment, you will have to treat it separately. Okay, separate accounting impact. It will hit the ROU asset also. It will hit the lease liability also. Even this is permitted by the standard. Is it okay? Have you understood? So you can ask the question any point of time, but typically the scenarios which I gave you, that is when you are going to recognize the lease asset, lease liability for that period. Is it okay? Yes. All clear. Manini has confirmed. Srishti, all clear. Rahul, Soham, Sanjay, Saksham, all clear so far? Yes. All clear. Okay, so Soham also has confirmed. Now we move on to the next part. Sir, इसका उल्टा हो सकता है क्या? Sir, उल्टा मतलब, suppose you are given a lease contract for 10 years with a termination option after 5 years. थोड़ा अलग है. Okay, पहला क्या था? Lease contract for 5 years plus extension option of 5 years. Now we are talking about the opposite. Lease tenure of 10 years minus a termination option. Okay, or rather lease tenure of 10 years with a termination option after 5 years. And now the question that arises is, how are you going to record this? Okay. Now you will have to ask the same set of questions that you have asked. Yes. Okay. Srishti is saying period of lease is changed. So now it is a new lease of 7 years. Yeah, when I say new lease, it means existing 2 plus new 5. So will there changes be made to the existing lease, or will it be treated as a new lease agreement? Typically, we reassess and modify the existing arrangement only. We reassess and modify the existing arrangement only. Okay, we'll see that in the next class. We'll see that in the next class. Is it okay? Yes. Just give me a minute. Just give me a minute. I'll be back. Give me a minute, please. Sorry for that. Yeah. So now coming back to our discussion. Okay. Now opposite can also happen, where you are given a total lease contract with a termination option in between. So now when you have a termination option, you will have to ask the question, and this termination option is there with the lessee. Right now I'm discussing the option available with the lessee. So now if the lessee has the termination option, you will ask the same questions. Are you likely to exercise the termination option? In which case it is going to be 5 years. Have you made any improvement which suggests a usage more than 5 years? Yes. Then you will not exercise the termination option. That means it will be 10 years. Is it a critical asset? Yes. Not exercise, 10 years. Sublease for 9 years. You are contractually bound to have the asset for at least 9 years. That means termination option won't be exercised. So 10 years. Economically, are you benefiting by not exercising the termination option? Yes. And therefore, you will not exercise the termination option. So these are the questions you will again ask, and then you will be getting an answer to that. You will be getting an answer to that. Is it okay? Yes, sure. So if I have to define my lease term is equal to non-cancelable period plus renewal, or plus renewal option, or it is going to be total period minus termination option. दोनों में से कुछ भी. Okay, it will be either non-cancelable plus renewal or total minus termination. Okay, and for these options, that is the renewal or termination option, what are you going to do? Check for economic benefits. Check for economic benefits to determine whether such periods would be included or excluded in lease term calculations. Is it okay? Yes. So this is your rule. This is your rule. Is it okay? Yes. All right. Clear, everyone? Yes. Sir, can we have a negative reassessment? Sir, what do you mean by a negative reassessment? Suppose I have an asset with a lease term of 10 years. So I thought that you will have this asset for 10 years. So I recognized my asset and liability for a 10-year period. There is a termination option of at the end of 5 years. Termination option at the end of 5 years. Ye tha. But we thought at the initial stage that we will not be exercising this option. So we took a 10-year period. At the end of the fourth year, COVID struck. And because COVID struck, apne ko pata chala I'll not be in a position to service this contract for the remaining 5 years. For the last 5 years. So what did I do? At the end of the fourth year, I told my lessor, देख भैया, COVID आ गया, मैं contract नहीं चला सकता. I am not in a position to service the contract. So therefore, what you should do is you will have to terminate this contract. I am exercising my termination option. Is the lessor bound to take note of that? Yes, because legally speaking, you can exercise it at any point of time. So end of fourth year, you exercise that. That means now your lease tenure should drop down. Earlier, it was how much? 10 years. Out of 10 years, 4 saal beat gaye. Yes, you have completed 4 years. That means you still have 6 years worth of ROU asset and 6 years worth of lease liability pending to be amortized and accounted. But now out of 6 years, by the second lot of 5 years, you are cancelling. So this 5 years cancellation will be a reassessment of the lease term, and ultimately end of fourth year you will have lease asset and lease liability of only 1 year. You will have lease asset and lease liability of only 1 year. Is it okay? So this is just a reverse case also, that termination option not exercise initially, exercise subsequently, that also is possible. That also is perfectly possible. Have you understood? Yes. So now ये तो हो गया मेरा लेसी के पर्सपेक्टिव से, फ्रॉम द पर्सपेक्टिव ऑफ द लेसी, ओके. रिन्यूअल का तो ठीक है, there won't be a problem, not an issue. Okay, renewal, whether the option is with the lessee or with the lessor, it won't make any difference. Okay, it won't make any difference. Okay, because the lessee knows whether he will exercise it or not. So as far as the renewal option is there, it won't matter whether it is with the lessee or the lessor. It is a straightforward understanding. However, the problem arises in case of termination option. And now pay attention, it is going to be very interesting. Termination option can be either with the lessee or it can be with the lessor, or it can be with both. अभी जरा सोच समझ के जवाब देना. If it is with the lessee, my lease is something like this: 10-year period with right to terminate after I'll keep it 6 years, so that 5 and 5 we do not get confused. Okay, कौन से 5 की बात हो रही है? Period over or period pending. So I'll keep it 6 years. Okay. You have a 10-year period with a right to terminate after 6 years. So now you think and tell me this option is there with the lessee. What will be the lease tenure? What will be the lease tenure? What will be the lease tenure? The lease period. If this option is there with the lessee, lease period kitna hoga? Will it be 6 years? Will it be 10 years? What is it going to be? 6 years. 6 years. Okay. So Manini is saying 6 years. Shailendra Singh, term in year 5 or year 6. Okay. So it is going to be 10 years if benefiting. Okay. So I am in the books of lessee, if that goes on to help you. Books of lessee. So I have to decide what is my lease period, because I have to recognize the ROU asset and the lease liability. So Manini is saying the lease period will be 6 years. Srishti is saying if it is benefiting, it will be 10 years. What do you think? Others, chip in. Shailendra, Soham, Rahul, or कौन था? Saksham. Please give in your answers. Sanjay, please chip in with your answers. Come on. If economic benefits are there, it will be 10. Otherwise, it is 6. So this is what Soham is telling. Others. Rahul is saying 6. Okay. Understand. I am in the books of lessee. I am in the books of lessee. I have to decide what is the lease period. Termination option also is there with the lessee only. So simple understanding. Likely to terminate. You ask yourself the question, is it likely that you are going to terminate the option? Yes. If that is the case, then the tenure is 6 years. If you are not likely to terminate, wo sab matlab not likely to terminate means what? If you are likely to benefit from it, then it is going to be 10 years. Then it is going to be 10 years. Are you agreeing with this? Are you agreeing with this part? Lessee's perspective, are you in agreement? Forget reassessment and all. वो तो होगा ही. That will be possible. But right now we are discussing as on the date, what are you going to treat? Okay. Agree. Srishti said she agrees. Manini, do you agree? Soham, do you agree? Shailendra, do you agree? Yes. Do you guys agree to this? Sanjay, Saksham, do you agree? Yes. All right. Manini also confirmed. Soham also confirmed. Rahul, what about you? Okay. Fairly simple. Now, you are in books of lessee only. Termination option आपके पास नहीं है. Termination option is with the lesser. Termination option is with the lesser. And now you tell me what will be the lease period. What will be the lease period? सोच समझ कर जवाब देना इसका. Lesser, the termination option is with the lesser and not with the lessee. We are in the books of lessee. That means we have to recognize ROU asset and lease liability today on the date of commencement. So if you have to recognize on the date of commencement, you will need to understand what will be the lease period, because basis that lease liability is determined. The Termination option is not with you, it's with the lessor. So what is going to be the period? Come on. Shailendra Singh is saying it will be 6 years. Srishti is saying it will be 6 years based on prudence. Manini is saying it will be 10 years. Aniket Jain is saying it will be 6 years. Today there is Sumit Jain is not there. Rahul is saying it will initially be 10 years and thereafter it will be re-examined. Soham is saying it will be same as the lessee. That means likely to terminate or not. Okay. Any other answers? Okay, no other answers. So now understand. I'll give you one more example. Hopefully you should be able to then revisit this one and understand. Okay. Suppose A Limited issues a debenture, a convertible debenture, convertible at the option of the holder, convertible at the option of the holder. How are you going to recognize this? Will you recognize it is a compound financial instrument? No doubt. Okay. But now the question is, will you recognize the outflows relating to interest as liability and the principal also as a liability? Or will you recognize principal as equity and this one as a liability, interest as a liability? Or will you recognize everything as equity? What do you think? Option to convert is not with the company, it is with the holder. Option to convert is with the holder, not with the company. What do you think? How are you going to recognize? I don't want exact accounting or something, just a ballpark answer. Okay. The equity portion will be there for the principal amount, or will you treat it as a liability? Liability. Srishti is saying we'll treat it as a liability. Exactly. Because in my hands, the company's hands, I do not know what my debenture holder will ask tomorrow. Kal ko utke wo cash पूछेगा and today I recognize it as equity. That is going to give rise to an anomaly. That is going to give rise to a serious anomaly. That point of time, I will have to rush to de-recognize equity and recognize the liability. Sir, liability recognize kiya and then he moves it on to an equity. Then it is simple. I can make the adjustment in the books for that change. But the reader of financial statements will be surprised if you do the first option. That means you book as equity, then you change it to a liability depending on that person's nature, depending on that person's option being exercised. So therefore, the standard tells us recognize it as a liability on account of an outflow that can happen at any point of time in the future. So therefore, do not take it as equity. Okay. Now, the same principle apply here. When I say liability, I have to recognize a lease liability. the lease liability is calculated depending on the period, okay. So now you tell me, will you recognize the lease liability if the termination option is available with the lessor as 6 years or 10 years? Come on. Everybody said liability. That means good. You all know. So now here also you should be in a position to tell whether it will be 6 years, whether it will be 10 years. Come on. On the first day, I have to recognize the lease liability. Should I take it as 6 years? Should I take it as 10 years? Yes, Srishti is saying 10 years. Shailendra is saying 10 years. It has to be 10 years. See, suppose you estimate it to be 6 years. You record the asset and liability as 6 years. At the end of the 6th year, the lessor does not exercise his option at all. Then what are you going to say? The first 6 years what you presented is an understated ROU asset and understated ROU liability. And therefore, you will have to recognize it at 10 years right from the very beginning. Sir, won't this be overstatement? It will be, but it is better on account of prudence. So now here you are using prudence. Why am I using prudence here? Because here the issue is not in the control of the entity. The termination option is not with the lessee. The termination option is with the lessor. That means it's not in control of the entity. And therefore, what is not in control of the lessee cannot decide on that. So there, the lessee has to adopt a conservative approach and think that lessor के लिए तो फायदेमंद होगा. So because it is advantageous for the lessor, the lease tenure is going to be 10 years only. Sir, 6 साल बाद terminate किया तो we will reverse it. We will reverse the ROU asset and as well as the lease liability at the end of 6 years. So the lease tenure is going to be a complete 10 years. And most important is, do not assess whether reasonably termination option कुछ गड़बड़ हो गया स्पेलिंग में. Do not assess whether the option will be exercised or not. You will do the accounting based on the 10-year being the total lease contract. Are you able to understand now? Yes. Aniket Jain, did you follow? Why 10 years? Yes. Shailendra Singh, Srishti Goyal, Soham, Rahul, Manini. All clear. Okay. So then we move on to the next part. Termination option is available with both. Termination option available with both. That means lessor के पास भी है, lessee के पास भी है. So now here, what do you think will be the lease tenure? Will it be 6 years? Will it be 4 years? Including the 4 years, 10 years. So here the standard gives a guidance and asks you to check, is there a significant penalty? Is there a significant penalty for termination? Is there a significant penalty after termination after 6 years? Significant penalty means अगर आपने agreement terminate किया, both lessor और lessee, दोनों में से किसी ने terminate किया, then the penalty will be 3 years lease rent to be paid. The penalty will be 3 years lease rent to be paid. If it is a significant penalty in that case, then it is going to be 10 years. Then it is going to be 10 years. If the penalty element is insignificant penalty, then it will be only 6 years. Is it okay? Yes. Are you able to follow? If there is a significant penalty, both the lessor and lessee will not exercise it, because if lessor exercises, lessee can, by way of an enforceable right, enforce the penalty. Similarly, if lessee exercises, lesser by way of the penalty clause can put the penalty on the lessee, and therefore the significant penalty is there, it will be 10 years, and if there is no significant penalty, it will be only 6 years. Is it okay? Yes. So this is all that is there about your lease options, lease period. Okay. This is all that is there about your lease periods. Okay. So you can come back to our discussion. Okay. It refers to non-cancelable period plus the renewal option, if reasonably certain that the renewal option will be exercised, plus periods covered where there is an option to terminate, if reasonably certain that the termination option will not be exercised. So we have discussed this. Assessment of the additional or deductible period is based on an evaluation of the factors that give rise to an economic incentive for the lessee to continue. So क्या है? Location of asset, significant improvements, rent significantly lower than the market rent in the optional period. Okay, so try these illustrations by yourselves. We have also mentioned termination option in lease, option with both lessor and lessee. Period covered after termination will not be included in the lease term, assuming there is insignificant termination penalty. Okay, with the lessee only, include the period under termination if lessee has economic benefits to continue, and exclude in case lessee has no economic incentives to continue. With the lessor only, okay, include the period after the termination option in the lease term, as lessee has an obligation to make the payments. Is it okay? So can the lease term be reassessed subsequently? Yes, if there is a change in circumstances. Okay, you are permitted to reassess that. Is it okay? Yes. Have we understood lease payments completely? Have we understood lease payments completely? Whatever I have discussed is there in the presentation. You should not face any difficulty in that. Okay. You should not face any difficulties in that. All clear? Okay, great. So we take it's 8:45 almost. We resume at 8:55. We take a 10-minute break, and then we shall discuss lease payments, the next most important part of our chapter. And with the discussion of lease payments, I think we are through with all the theory for the time being. We should be in a position to solve the questions from tomorrow, for tomorrow's class. Okay, so take a 10-minute break. We shall resume at 8:55. Okay, ठीक है. Nisarg, break. Okay, welcome back. So coming to the most important. See, we have to recognize a lease liability. Lease liability recognition, you need two things. One is मेरा outflow कितना होगा. The next thing that you are going to need is मेरा term कितना है. So these are the two most important things. Lease term we saw. It will include the option for renewal or termination if it is at the option of the lessee. Option of lesser termination option, ignore it, take the full period. If a termination option is there at the option of both, then if there is a significant penalty, take the total period. Otherwise, you take the reduced period in case the penalty is not significant. Okay, so this takes care of the lease period. Now we come to the most important part of our discussion, that is lease payments. So with this, we should be concluding everything about lease liability. Okay, इसके बाद छोटी-छोटी चीजें रहेंगे, that should not take much time. Okay. So when we talk about lease payments, it is the sum total of 5 broad heads. One is the fixed lease payments. The next is variable lease payments. The third is exercise price of a purchase option. The fourth one is penalty for termination of the lease. The fifth one is payments made under residual value guarantee. Sum total of all this will become the lease payments on the basis of which your lease liability will be calculated. Okay. Now, let us move on to one by one. Fixed payments. What do we mean by fixed payments, sir? Fixed payments means the payments which are specified in the lease contract. The payments which are specified in the lease contract. That means fixed payments. Well, you have the contract which says that this factory, you can take it on lease, you can take it on rent, provided you pay a lease rental of rupees 1 lakh per annum for the next 15 years. So this becomes your fixed payment. This becomes your fixed payment. Okay. Sometimes you will have contracts which say that you will have lease payment as 1 lakh per annum plus 5% escalation year on year. 5% escalation year on year. So what does this mean? This means that my lease amount is going to change every year. So when it is going to change, will it become variable? Answer is no. When I talk about fixed payment, I mean determinable payments. Determinable payments. Determinable matlab kya? Sitting today, I can calculate my lease payments after 15 years. Go on adding 5% every year. That will be my lease payment in the 15th year. So that is the meaning of fixed payments. Fixed ka matlab hota hai determinable sums to be paid. So a 5% escalation does not mean that my payments have become variable. No, payments are fixed only. The 5% escalation is a part of your lease contract. It means you can calculate the lease payments easily. Okay. What is lease? A lease is a contract to use the asset over a period of time. So as long as your payments are showing that the payments are being made on account of passage of time, it will be a part of lease calculations. So what is important is payments, any payments should reflect passage of time to be classified as lease payments. And how do you know it is taken as passage of time? Because look at the lease liability. I am amortizing it like a financial liability, considering a discount calculating the interest, payment, closing balance. So I am recognizing a lease liability and then amortizing it over a period of time as if it were a financial liability. So that means I am treating it as a movement in liability on account of passage of time. So therefore, any payments, if you have to treat them as lease payments, you will have to ensure that they reflect passage of time. If they reflect something else other than passage of time, then it will not be a lease payment. It will not be a lease payment. Sir, ऐसा होगा? हो सकता है. I will come to that in just a short while from now. But any payment showing a passage of time will not be classified as lease payments. Other than passage of time, no, it's not a lease payment. Okay. So this is what is your fixed lease payments. This is what is your fixed lease payments. So I have covered this part, fixed payments. Sir, what do you mean by in substance fixed payments? So let us take an example. Let us take an example. Okay. Now, suppose you have an agreement. You are a franchisee, KFC, for example. KFC, for example. Now, the agreement goes something like this. The lease rent is going to be based on footfalls. Based on footfalls. Footfalls. So suppose nobody comes in a month, 0 footfalls. That means the KFC shop will have to pay a rent of 1 lakh. Suppose the footfalls is 1 to 5,000 in 1 month. Then you will be paying 1 lakh plus the maximum number of footfalls, 5,000. Suppose it is 5,001 to 10,000. Then you will be paying rupees 1 lakh plus rupees 10,000. Suppose it is 10,001 and above. Then you will be paying rupees 1 lakh plus rupees 15,000. This is what is going to be my lease rent plans. Okay. So now tell me one thing. In this lease contract, what is the minimum rent you will pay at all time? What is the minimum rent you will pay at all time? What is the minimum rent that you are going to pay? What is the minimum rent that you are going to pay? Srishti, Manini, both of you, absolutely right. The minimum rent that I am going to pay is 1 lakh. The minimum rent that I am going to pay at all times is rupees 1 lakh. Okay. So now this 1 lakh, therefore rupees 1 lakh per month is in substance, a fixed lease payment. And where it will go? It will go in my lease calculation. It will go in my lease liability calculation. Okay. In substance, a fixed lease payment. So what can I define? Sir, agar definition ki baat karo, so what is a fixed lease payment? Out of all realistic possibilities, comma, minimum lease rentals payable at all times. Minimum lease rentals payable at all times is called as in substance fixed lease payments. In substance fixed lease payments. Suppose let me modify this, and if there are no footfalls, you will not pay anything. If the footfalls are 1 to 5,000, you will pay 1 lakh plus 5,000. If it is 5,000, 1 to 10,000, it will be 1 lakh plus 10,000. If it will be more than 10,000, 1 lakh plus 15,000. So now you tell me, what is the minimum lease payments here? What is the minimum lease payment now once I modified the example? What is the minimum lease payment now? Minimum lease payment is nil. Is this possibility realistic? हाँ हो सकता है ना. See, suppose people are so aware that they know that junk food should not be consumed. If that is the level of awareness, all these junk food stores will ultimately have to shut shop. That requires a lot of awareness from us as a society, but it is possible. And suppose we reach that level of awareness, having zero footfalls in an outlet like KFC will happen, in which case the lease rent is going to be zero. So in other words, there is no fixed lease payment in this case. There is no fixed lease payment in this case. Okay. So therefore, this will be a realistic outcome. This will be a realistic outcome. No fixed lease payments. Acha, if there are no fixed lease payments, all of them are variable lease payments. All of them are variable lease payments. And because they are variable lease payments, we will then have to check it is dependent on what? Is it reflecting a passage of time, or is it reflecting what you can say characteristics other than passage of time? Is it reflecting passage of time, or is it reflecting something other than passage of time? If it is reflecting other than passage of time, then it will not be a lease payment, it will be a general rental expenditure. If it is reflecting passage of time, it will be treated as part of the lease payments. Is it okay? So this is what you understand by in substance fixed lease payments. Okay. So important words is realistic possibilities, minimum lease rentals payable. The minimum lease rentals payable out of the realistic possibilities, these are known as in substance fixed lease payments. Since they reflect passage of time, you will take them as a part of your lease payments. So if you look at the calculation, there you go. Fixed payments including in substance fixed payments, in substance fixed payments. Okay. For your ease, I'll be sharing this. I have also referred which slides, which points are covered. Okay. So 34, 1 and 2 deals with fixed payments and in substance fixed payments. Okay. We then move on to the next part of this, lease incentives after the commencement date. Lease incentives after the commencement date. Okay. So let us look at what are my lease incentives. My lease incentives, see, ideally, who should pay whom? Lessee should pay to the lessor for the ROU asset. For the ROU asset. Ideally, this should be the case because lessor gives the asset, lessee makes the payment to the lessor. Sometimes it may so happen that the lessor is trying so hard to put his property on lease. Lessor is trying very hard. Okay. Now, if this payment which is being made, if this payment which is being made, ROU asset, this payment which is being made not only flows from lessee to lessor, there is a payment that the lessor also makes to the lessee. Why does he make? वो इतना खुश है. He was trying to sell his asset, put his property on lease, but nobody was coming. So finally he gave an ad. I will pay 1 lakh rupees to that person who agrees to take my property on rent. Okay. एक महीने का भाड़ा मैं दे दूंगा if he agrees to take my property on rent. So this is a payment, an incentive which is given to the lessee by the lessor. This is an incentive which is given to the lessee by the lessor. So the question arises, when is lease incentive given? When is lease incentive given? Okay. Now we answer this question. Is it given after commencement? Is it given after commencement, or is it given before commencement? Is it given after commencement, or is it given before the commencement? And the question arises, sir, suppose it is given after commencement. After commencement means what? ROU asset, lease liability. Both of them are already recorded. ROU asset and lease liability, both of them are already recorded. If we have to take it as before commencement, then ROU asset liability is recognized on the commencement date. So in this case, there won't be any ROU asset or lease liability. There won't be any ROU asset or lease liability. So if it is received before commencement, the entry that will be passed is bank account debit to lessor. You get the amount from him and park it in your advance received. And then once the ROU asset is recognized, you will pass the entry lessor account debit to ROU asset. You cannot credit the lease liability because your liability is not increasing on this account. Your liability is not increasing on this account. Have you understood before commencement what happens? Okay. Now coming to after commencement. All right. Now incentives reduce the cash outflow. Okay. If the lease incentives are payable after commencement, if the lease incentives are payable after the commencement, that means what? Ideally, I calculate my lease liability like this. Year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Outflow 1 lakh, 1 lakh, 1 lakh, 1 lakh, 1 lakh. Then I take discounting factor and then I calculate my present value. So now if there is a lease liability, if there is a lease incentive that is payable after commencement, what will happen is my outflow will come down to that extent. Suppose it is the third year I am going to receive the lease incentive. Then in my lease liability calculation, whatever was supposed to be my outflow in the third year will be reduced by the lease incentive that you expect to receive. So my lease liability will go down by 1 lakh in absolute terms. In present value terms, it will be impacted on account of discounting. But in absolute terms, my lease liability goes down. Did you understand? You cannot take this 1 lakh as other income. This 1 lakh is not other income, but reduces the lease liability, but reduces the lease liability. Have you understood this? If it happens after commencement, so it would be there in the terms of the contract that this incentive would be payable. So you know it in advance, so it will reduce your lease liability calculations, and therefore your lease liability in effect goes down on account of the receipt of the incentive. Okay, so this takes care of the lease incentive. You look at the calculations now. Fixed payments will be considered. To that you will add in substance fixed payments. From that you are going to deduct lease incentives after the commencement date. From that you are going to deduct lease incentives after the commencement date. Now in your lease payments, which is most important, in that variable payments is most important. Okay, so lease payments among the entire chapter is very important. In lease payment also, what is more important is variable lease payments. Okay, so you will consider variable lease payments. Now Srishti, I will address your question now in this part. Okay, variable lease payments. Achha. What do we mean by variable lease payments? Okay, sir, variable lease payments means payments which are not fixed. Sir, what do you mean by payments which are not fixed? Not fixed means they are going to change from time to time. So the question arises, sir, how do we, can you give us an example of a variable payment? Okay, I can give two examples. Lease payments reflect passage of time. Lease payments reflect factors other than passage of time. Example, footfalls, revenue, etc. So anything like this. So now the question arises, what will be a lease payment? Okay, technically both of them will be there in the agreement, but for the purpose of Ind AS 116, we will consider only the lease payments which reflect a passage of time. And these do not reflect passage of time. Do not reflect passage of time. They are more related to performance. They are more aligned with performance. And therefore not covered under Ind AS 116. So if it's not covered under Ind AS 116, typically you expense it out to P&L. Expense it out to P&L. However, when you come to lease payments reflecting passage of time, वो कैसे होगा? For example, lease payments linked to a rate or index. Sir, what do you mean linked to a rate or index? It means lease rentals or lease payments will change in accordance with change in a particular rate. For example, LIBOR, MIBOR, etc., or a particular index. For example, wholesale price index, consumer price index, Sensex, Nifty, cost inflation index, etc., etc. कुछ भी, any index, any rate. Okay, it's not stuck to Libor or Mibor, etc., but any index or any rate. So whatever be the rate or whatever be the index that is there, the movement or change in the lease payments will happen in accordance with that lease, in accordance with that rate, in accordance with that rate. So then it becomes a perfectly variable lease payment which reflects the passage of time, and for that purpose it is going to be covered under Ind AS 116. For that purpose it is going to be covered under Ind AS 116. See, you are going to enter, say, into a 15-year lease contract. Since you are entering into a 15-year lease contract, you will say, देख बेटा, मुझे तो escalation चाहिए, because 15 साल बाद मेरा inflation will be very high. So therefore, this rent only will not continue. So you will tell, the lessee will tell, I understand, but can you tell me what is the escalation? Every year 10%. You will tell, but उतना तो inflation है ही नहीं. Our inflation is in the range of 6 to 7%. Then he will say, some cases it may increase. Future किसने देखा है? So you will also tell exactly my point. Who has seen the future to think that the inflation will be 10%? Nobody has seen it. And therefore, both of them have to agree to something which is fair. So they will look at RBI rate of inflation. They will look at RBI rates. They will look at London interbank offer rate or Mumbai interbank offer rate, or they will look at a better measure of inflation, which is my consumer price index or wholesale price index. And depending on the movement in that prices, you will be recording the lease payments. At least, are you okay with the difference between variable and fixed? Yes, variable is not a blanket 5% increase. No, that becomes fixed because it is determinable amounts of payments. Okay, are you at least able to understand so far what do you mean by payments linked to a rate or an index? Yes, all clear? Okay, so Manini has confirmed. All right, now we move on to how these payments move. Okay, how these payments move. Okay, so suppose year 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, now payments, consumer price index, not consumer price index. First we will take RBI rates or Libor, Vibor, whatever it is. Okay, so now first year the payment is going to be 1 lakh. That is what is there in your agreement. Okay, now in the first year when your agreement is going to be 1 lakh, suppose RBI rate is 3% at the end of year 1. So end of year 1 or beginning of year 2, you know that the lease rent is going to be 1,03,000 for year 2. So end of year 2, you will have to get a payment of 1,03,000. Now we move on to the next rate, that is, say, 5%. So 1,03,000 into 1.05, 108,150. Then we move on to, say, 4%. So into 4%, 1,12,476. Okay. Then we move on to, let us say, 2% into 1.02. So 114,726. Okay, so this is how it looks like. Can anybody tell me what is the problem with variable lease payments? What is the problem with this? I can tell you how to think. When does ROU asset or lease liability get recorded? Think on these lines, you will be able to find a problem in this. You will be able to find a problem here if you think on these lines. Okay. चलो जल्दी सोचो सोचो सोचो. No fixed payment is there, that is okay. I'm not concerned about fixed payment right now. वो मेरे को मालूम है. I am concerned with something else. What is the problem in this? No fixed criteria of rates. That is also fine. Many times I feel Manini and Srishti are sitting together and studying, because both their answers are almost always at the same time and similar. Commencement date. Exactly. So now, when do I know that RBI's rate is 3%? This rate I will know at the beginning or at the end, whatever. Okay. But when will I know 5%, 4%, 2%? कब मालूम होगा मुझे? I will come to know this in year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. The problem is I have to recognize an ROU asset and a lease liability on the commencement date. I have to recognize it on the commencement date. That means I should know what will be the payments in the future right on the commencement date. If it is a fixed payment, I'm not worried. I can determine it myself. But on the commencement date, how will I know what will be the RBI rates in the future? This is the problem with variable payments. This is the problem with variable payments. भाई मुझे निकालना है lease liability on the commencement date. But on commencement date, I do not know RBI rates. Replace RBI rates with LIBOR. Replace RBI rates with MIBOR. कौन सा भी रेट डालो, आपको 2 साल बाद का रेट आज थोड़े ना पता होगा. You will not know what will be the rates after a period of 2 years, after 3 years, after 5 years, after 10 years. I do not know it. And nobody has the foresightedness to calculate after 10 years, 15 years, kitna hoga. Nobody can accurately predict. And therefore, we are now in a catch-22 situation. The situation being, I have to calculate my lease liability, but mujhe outflows pata nahi hai. I do not know the outflows. Okay. So now the standard comes to your rescue. The standard tells that do not estimate the rates. हम accountant है, अपने को मालूम है estimation सब जगह चलता है. So then you should not jump up and say, sir, estimate कर लेंगे. हम last time trend देखेंगे and then we will just estimate the payments in the future. Ind AS 116 says no estimation. Ind AS 116 tells no estimation. Sir, why no estimation? Because estimation brings bias, and bias means your financial statements do not present a true and fair view. Do not present a true and fair view. So therefore, what are you going to present? Sir, I know RBI's rate is 3% at the beginning of the period. Okay. And I know that this is the increase which I will have to align my payments in the future. This is the increase which I will have to align my payments in the future. So therefore, on the first day, I will assume that 3%, 3%, 3%, 3% is what is going to be my RBI rate throughout, because this is the only known factor today. This is the only known factor today. So therefore, based on this data, I will proceed to calculate my liabilities. 106090 into 109273 into 1.03. 1,12,551. You will do the calculation of the lease liability, assuming that your RBI rate is going to continue at 3%, assuming that it is going to continue at 3%. And is it correct? It is not. I am not going to pay 1,06,000 in the third year. I am not going to pay 1,09,000 in the fourth. I am not going to pay 1,12,000 in the fifth. But at least I have a base to substantiate this 3%. What is the base? Sir, this is RBI rates. Okay, this is RBI rate. So 3% ke liye I have a base. If you start to estimate on the first day of the RBI rates in the future, then so many projected RBI rates will come. Jitne lease arrangement hai in the country, that many RBI estimates will be there, which is not practical, not possible, not correct also. So take this rate and do the working. Okay, all right. So maine working kar diya. I did the working. Now, in the first year is done, you recorded 1 lakh. Second year is done, you took 1,03,000 and recorded. Now, in the second year, this becomes 5%. So therefore, in the second year, you will take this as 1,03,000 into 1.05. So 1,08,150 is the payment which you will make in the third year. And then what are you going to do? Remove all this 3%, keep it at 5% henceforth, because that is the latest rate which is there, and then proceed to calculate. So 108,150, 1.05. So 1,13,558 into 1.05, 1,19,235. And this is how you will do the calculation from the second year onwards. Sir, that means in the second year, my lease liability will undergo a change, because initially I calculated using 3%. Now at the end of second year, I have a 5% rate which is known to me. So I know my lease liability for the third year will be 1,08,000, and you are saying to continue with the same rate in the future. So therefore, we will take 5% in the future. Yes, you will take 5% in the future. And therefore, in the second year, you will reassess the lease liability. You will reassess the lease liability. And once you reassess the lease liability, you will again have to restate the ROU asset and the lease liability on account of such reassessment. On account of such reassessment. Is it okay? Yes, are you able to understand? Sir, third year may suppose this rate becomes 7%. Then 1,08,000 plus 7% will be the payment for the fourth year. And then go on adding 7% until you exhaust the lease tenure. And then you proceed with calculating the what you can say lease liabilities, calculating the lease liabilities. Every time you will have to restate. Every time you will have to restate. Is it okay? Have you understood? Yes. Have you understood this assessment at every year? Is it clear? Yes. Now the problem is something else. Sir, हम तो यही करेंगे फिर. Every year we assess, every year we reassess, फिर से reassess, means ये तो बहुत बड़ा exercise हो गया, because reassessment means you know what will happen, lease liability will change, lease liability के साथ finance cost will change, lease liability के साथ ROU asset will change, with ROU asset depreciation will change. So every year only change ही change करना पड़ेगा अपने को. So therefore the standard here tells, effect of change to be given only when cash flows change. Only when cash flows change. Okay. only when cash flows change. Okay. So therefore, practically, how are these agreements structured? Practically, these agreements are structured as increase in lease payments. Variable lease payments means lease payments will increase in line with the LIBOR, MIBOR, whatever be the rate. But the cash flows will change every 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or whatever it is. Okay. So the restatement will not be done every year. But yes, the restatement will be done based on the cash flows whenever it gets modified, whenever it gets changed. Okay. So now, for example, suppose the cash flows change every 2 years. Cash flows change every 2 years. So here RBI rate is 3%. So here you know that you are going to pay 1,03,000. You know that you are going to pay 1,03,000. So you will proceed with this calculation and do the working. Okay, so here you will proceed with the calculation. Plus 3%, plus 3%, plus 3%, because no other data is available here. No other data is available here. Now what happens is, second year is done. Okay, the cash flows will not change. So 3% aa gaya, you will get how much? 1,03,000 into 1.03. So here it will be 106,090. RBI rate actually is going to be 5% here. You know this, but you will not reassess your liability because cash flows will change every 2 years. So end of year 1 chhod ke, that is how the lease agreement is structured. End of year 2, you will pay at 3%. End of year 3 also you will pay at 3%. Here also the cash flows are not undergoing a change. So year 1, year 2, year 3 will happen exactly the way you have projected, exactly the way you have projected in your lease liability workings. You thought 3%, you knew 3% is the actual rate. So 1,03,000, 1,06,000 is what you would have estimated in your lease liability workings. Utne ka hi payment hoga. This 5% ka impact hum nahi pakdenge because my cash flows are not changing. So I am not going to reassess my lease liability and the ROU asset at the end of year 2. I am not going to reassess. Suppose at the end of year 3, the RBI rate goes to 7%. And now what happens is year 4 onwards, cash flow changes means the lease rents will be computed accordingly. See, ideally, I had explained, okay, first year it would be 1 lakh. Second year it would be 1,03,000 plus 3%. Third year it would be 1,03,000 into 1.05 because RBI rate is 1.05. So 1,08,150. Fourth year it would be plus 7%. So into 1.07, 1,15,721. Ideally, this should be my lease payments. But how the contract is saying that the lease cash flows will change every 2 years after the first year. Okay, so second and third year will go assuming 3% only. That means my cash flows here are not changing. They are getting calculated based on the first year RBI rate of 3%. Based on the first year RBI rate of 3%. The cash flows are changing in the fourth year depending on the RBI rate for the third year. So here the new cash flow is going to be 1,06,090. 6,090 into 1.07. So now this is going to be 1,13,516. And now you proceed with 7% estimation throughout. So into 1.07, 121,462 into 1.07. 129,965. So for the next years, that means for this year 1,13,000 and 1,21,000, these two lease liabilities will be paid based on the RBI rate of 7%. Even though suppose for the fourth year the RBI rate is 10%, will you change the cash flows for year 5? Answer is no, you will not. Your cash flows are functioning every 2 years, are changing every 2 years. So you will record that change every 2 years. In other words, end of year 3, will you change the liability? Answer is yes, you will change the liability based on the 7% rate, because you know that year 4 onwards, the cash flows are going to change, taking the 7% into account. Once that is done, end of year 4, will you change it again? No, you won't, because abhi change hua hai. You will change it end of year 5. Why end of year 5? Because end of year 5, if the rate is 12%, you will then base the remaining calculations on 12%. So end of year 5, you will again reassess the lease liability and the ROU asset. End of year 6, you won't. End of year 7, फिर से करोगे. End of year 8, you won't. Year 9, you will. Like that, you will go on doing the reassessment. So this is not exactly a practical expedient, but this is how your calculations are being done. This is how your calculations are being done to avoid every year restatement of lease liability and ROU asset. The cash flow changes are mapped. The cash flow changes are mapped in the lease agreement to change every 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. That means what? For 2, 3, 5 years, etc., the same ROU asset, the same lease liability will continue. And once that period is done, there is a change, reassess, continue for the next 2, 3 or 5 years. Then again, there is a change, use that new rate, continue for the next 2, 3 or 5 years. And this is how you will do the valuation of the lease liability in the case of variable payments. These are variable payments. These are variable payments because these payments reflect passage of time. These payments reflect passage of time. Is it okay? Yes. So हम यही practical expedient है. There is no other practical expedient. Okay. So Kaushiki, did you understand cash flow changes? Yes. Soham, did you follow? Srishti, did you follow? Yes. All clear? Yes or no? Bolo. All right. So Kaushiki has confirmed. Soham has confirmed. Srishti has confirmed. Okay. And now we take another case of variable lease payment based on index, So year 1, 1 lakh, when your CPI, consumer price index, is 100. Year 2, the consumer price index is say 125. So your lease liability is 1 lakh into 125 by 100. So this becomes 1,25,000. Third case, suppose this becomes 135. Then what you are going to do? Into 135 divided by 125. So this will become 1,35,000. This will become 1,35,000. Likewise, you will go on calculating the lease payments every year. Okay. Every year. But sir, on the commencement date, I have to calculate. No. So if I have to calculate it on the commencement date, how will I treat it? How will I record it? On the commencement date, can I estimate the future CPIs? Can I estimate the future price indices? Answer is no, you cannot. And because you cannot estimate the previous price indices, what the standard tells, take this price index only and calculate the lease liability. It will remain as 1 lakh. It will remain as 1 lakh. You will take 1 lakh into 100 by 100. So 1 lakh each year. 1 lakh each year. Sir, ये तो गलत हो गया ना. Fixed lease payment is what is happening. Sir, in the case of rates, I could at least add. You can see 1 lakh, 1 lakh 3, 1 lakh 6. The payments are changing. यहाँ पे the payments are not changing. Every year it is coming 1 lakh, 1 lakh, 1 lakh. That is the limitation of the method. That is the limitation of the indices method. But I cannot estimate the indices in the future. So only one way is possible. Current year CPI will be the CPI for the future levels also. So 1 lakh into 100 by 100, 100 by 100, like that you are going to do your working. And then suppose the cash flows are changing in the middle, the cash flows are changing in between, then what you need to do is you then need to modify it in a similar manner like how we did here, and then reassess the lease liability and lease ROU asset at the point when the cash flow changes, Have you understood? Yes. Did you understand? I cannot estimate my CPIs in the future. So एक ही option है. First day I will take that the CPI is 100 on all the years. It will be 100 on all the years. And then I will do the calculation. Later on, जब भी cash flow change होगा, suppose cash flow changes here in the third year. So you will take it as 1,35,000, and then every year after that, the inflation factor will be 135, and then you continue. In year 5, suppose it becomes 146 लेके complete करो. 146 लेके complete करो. That is how you are going to do the calculation. We have a detailed question on this. So we will be proceeding with that question in the next class. Okay. In fact, that is the most important question. वो December 21 exam में भी आ चुका है. Okay. So we will be doing that question in the next class. Is it okay? Many of you have confirmed yes. So we have discussed variable lease payments. Exercise price of a purchase option if it is reasonably certain to exercise the option. Self-explanatory, nothing to explain. Penalties for terminating the lease if it is reasonable that the termination option will be exercised. This is typically termination option. The option is available at both person's end. So therefore, in that case, if the penalty is insignificant, you will include that in your lease payments. Okay. And finally, you have a residual value guarantee by the lessee. So it is so possible that sometimes the lessee uses the asset of the lessor. There could be manhandling, there could be improper usage or rough usage. So therefore, the assets may get spoiled. So the lease contract contains certain residual value guarantees, whereby a particular minimal guaranteed value is paid to the lessor. So whatever be the gap between the estimate and that value, that is known as residual value guarantee, which will flow from the lessee to the lessor, and that is why it will also become a part of my lease payments. Have you understood? Yes. Have you understood? See, I have discussed lease incentives. I have discussed variable payments. All of it I have discussed. Lease with purchase option discussed. Residual value guarantee discussed. Okay. So what I want you to do in the next class is, for the next class, I need you to be prepared with a lot of things. Okay. for the next class, I need you to discuss, solve all these questions. Okay, I need you to solve all these questions, and then we will be in a position to start physically solving the questions in the next class. If you don't revise, don't see, you can even go to the next slides and prepare it up and come. Look at the illustrations, look at the solutions, try to get the answers. Okay, look at the previous lectures. Okay, and then basis that, once you are ready, we can proceed faster. Okay, so I am optimistic that you guys will look after this. So on Thursday's class, I want to directly start with a brief introduction of whatever concepts are there, and then we will start with problem solving. Okay, problem solving, we'll do it on Excel. It saves my time also, because here वो table बनाना पड़ता है discounting का, तो वो मेरे लिए it's better if we do it on Excel. Okay, so go through this, revise what is done, read something up in advance, solve all the illustrations, and then we shall be in a position to start our work on Thursday and complete it also. Okay, so thank you everyone, have a good day, and see you guys on Thursday. Okay, see you on Thursday. We should conclude this standard. Okay, thank you everyone.